Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Excellent. I want to welcome you all to tonight's presentation. I'm Colonel Dave Gray. I'm the Executive Director here at the Center for Leadership and Ethics, and I'm the class leader for HI 284. I want to welcome my students here, and I want to welcome Dr. Christensen's students here from HI 386. Now, tonight, I also want to recognize that this is a joint endeavor tonight between the Center for Leadership, the Adams Center, and the Dean's Academic Speaker Program. Tonight's topic is extremely relevant for all of our future military leaders and leaders of our country and students of military history, as coalition warfare and leading multinational forces is the way the Americans fight. You will be involved at some level, even down to your level as junior officers with armies from other nations. Now, our speaker tonight, a distinguished VMI alumni, is well qualified to speak on this very topic. Colonel Roland Tiso was commissioned as Second Lieutenant of Infantry from VMI in 1973. His 31-year military career included command of infantry companies in Korea and the United States, the 1st Battalion 508th Airborne Infantry in Panama, and the United States Task Force Sinai Multinational Force and Observers in Egypt. He was Chief of War Plans Division, U.S. Central Command in 1996 and 97, and was one of the primary planners of the Iraq War Plan, 1003, I think. He was the executive officer to the Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Central Command, General Zinni, from 1998 to 2000. Colonel Tiso is a graduate of the U.S. Army War College, the Command and General Staff College, and the Armed Forces Staff College. Colonel Tiso saw combat action in Korea, Panama, Somalia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He was selected by the Secretary of the Army as a distinguished member of the 506th Infantry Regiment in 2022 and inducted into the U.S. Army National ROTC Hall of Fame in 2024. He retired from defense contracting in 2020 and has since authored a memoir of his multinational experiences in the Middle East and the war in Iraq. It's up there on the screen. I have to agree it's an apt title. He and his wife, Judy, reside in Valrico, Florida. Now, I'd like to say, incidentally, Colonel Tiso and I have a history that dates back to our company grade years in the great 101st Airborne Air Assault, where we served in different battalions in the 503rd Infantry Regiment, but we competed all the time in athletic events and the infamous Turkey Bowl, which we won, sir. And then we crossed paths again later on during a multinational partnership for peace exercise in Kazakhstan. So please join me with a warm welcome to Colonel Roland Tiso.
Well, thank you very much, Dave, for that very kind introduction. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for that very warm reception. And before I really get started here, let me just say and correct Colonel Gray. It wasn't the Turkey Bowl, it was the Jones Bowl, named after the great Colonel Jones, who led the 503rd Infantry Regiment during the airborne assault on Corregidor in 1944 over the Philippines. It was a football game, and yes, I have to give it to him. The 2nd of the 503rd did defeat us, and on that part, he's correct. But I'm very thrilled to be here. Colonel Gray, Lieutenant Colonel Christensen, Dr. Jensen, distinguished members of the faculty and staff, and most importantly, you members of the Corps of Cadets, and of course, my brotherettes. As future military officers and/or government leaders, you can expect that military and diplomatic engagement, be it in military exercises, actual warfare, or matters of state, will be conducted with multinational partners. Now, this has been the case since both world wars, but has been perhaps most evident in the wars our country has fought in the Middle East and Central Asia since 1990. Now, my personal experiences with multinational forces have been extensive, but most notably since the 1990s, when I served throughout Central and South America as a battalion commander, and then in the Central region in a variety of different positions of command and staff, including duty with the United Nations, the Multinational Force and Observers, as an executive assistant to the Central Command Commander, and ultimately as the senior military advisor to the Arab Peninsula Shield Force in Kuwait, as one of the principal planners for the new Iraqi army in Baghdad, and as the senior military advisor to the Polish-led Multinational Division Central South in southern Iraq. I published a memoir of my experiences in the Middle East and during the Iraq War, and those experiences and lessons learned will form the basis of my presentation tonight. It is my sincere hope that my presentation will stimulate your thoughts on multinational operations, planning, and leadership, and encourage you to engage in professional discourse and ask any questions you may have following the presentation. Now, the soldier on the cover of In Strange Company, shown riding atop a Ukrainian armored personnel carrier, a BTR-80, hasn't slept or shaved in 48 hours. The photo was taken some 200 meters from Iranian besieged fighters crossing the Iraqi border somewhere along the 142 kilometers of border patrolled by a reinforced company of Ukrainian paratroops. A firefight would occur only a few minutes after the photo was taken. And yes, that soldier is me. Now, my military career began, as most did, for young infantry officers of my era with assignments to United States divisions. But I did have some interaction with Egyptian and South Korean airborne forces in the late 1970s and early 80s. In the 90s, my career became closely associated with foreign forces and multinational commands throughout South America, then Africa, the Persian Gulf, and Central and South Asia. My experiences with the United Nations and the multinational force and observers were very enlightening about leadership and command in the multinational environment. As I discuss in detail in this book, But my assignments to United States Central Command and the Central Region placed me at one time or another under all of the flags of the Gulf region and many of those of Eastern and Western Europe, and provided multinational experiences in a most unusual and exciting way. My long war in the Middle East started with an assignment to United States Central Command in the summer of 1994, following my graduation from the United States Army War College. Central Command was responsible at that time for overseeing 27 countries, and its fundamental mission was, and remains today, to provide command and control of all forces deployed to its area of responsibility, or AOR, and conduct exercises and combat operations when circumstances dictate. Major operations during the period I was assigned to the command are as shown on the slide. Most prominently, Operations Desert Storm, which was not officially ended, by the way, until late in 1995. Enduring Freedom, our operations in Afghanistan, and Iraqi Freedom. In the aftermath of the Desert Storm offensive phase and the decision not to invade Iraq and remove the Saddam Hussein regime, it became clear to those in the plans community that another war with Iraq was likely and perhaps inevitable. Operations Plan, or Op Plan 1002, for war with Iraq was on the shelf of both the Joint Staff and the Central Command staff, but had never been formally approved by either the Joint Staff or the Department of Defense staff. It became clear that an approved plan was needed in August of 1994, when Saddam Hussein threatened Kuwait again with another invasion that prompted Operation Vigilant Warrior, the deployment of United States forces to defend Kuwait. Now, the national military strategy in 1994 focused on what was referred to as the two-theater of war approach to deal with a war in the Middle East and a near-simultaneous war on the Korean Peninsula. United States Central Command and United States Pacific Command, U.S. Forces Korea, were directed in the Joint Strategic Capabilities Plan, which is developed by the Joint Staff to develop two plans, Op Plans 1003 and 1015, and Op Plans 5027 and 5028, respectively, to address when one or the other was the first or second war to be fought within an agreed planning figure of 45 days, separating the initiation of hostilities in the two theaters of war. The plans required considerable combat and combat support forces
for the maneuver phases of both wars, but a large number of ground combat forces were particularly needed for the occupation phase of CENTCOM's Op Plan 1003. The plan called for 350,000 troops, 10 Iraqi divisions that would be reconstituted under vetted leadership, and European and Arab forces similar to what was provided during the First Gulf War. The Central Command plans were developed under the command of our former superintendent, General Binford P. He was succeeded by General Zinni, who commanded United States Central Command from 1997 to 2000, and directed that a war game titled Desert Crossing be conducted in 1999 in Washington, D.C., with significant interagency participation to ensure all entities understood what an undertaking in Iraq would entail and the forces necessary to achieve mission success during both the maneuver and occupation phases of the war. The exercise was very enlightening for all participants, but regardless, the United States failed to employ the plan's requirements as envisioned for the post-maneuver phase of the Iraq campaign in 2003. And not surprisingly, the United States and coalition forces failed to adequately secure the country, subdue internal and external threats, and withdraw its forces in a timely manner. As I stated earlier, my career included a number of unusual multinational and foreign assignments, all of which are discussed to one degree or another in this book. Most significantly, the foreign and multinational experiences during Iraqi freedom, including my assignment to develop the new Iraqi Army, duty with the Peninsula Shield Force, and the Multinational Division Central South, are discussed in detail. The Peninsula Shield Force served and played a significant role in the defense of Kuwait in the spring of 2003. It was, and I suspect still is, a deeply flawed organization, hastily organized for deployment under Saudi Arabian command. The Peninsula Shield Force is a standing organization with its headquarters located in a cantonment at King Khalid Military City in northeastern Saudi Arabia, some 60 kilometers south of Hafar al-Batin City and some 120 kilometers south of the Iraq border. The cantonment area can accommodate, or could accommodate in 2003, upwards to 65,000 people. Its multinational units from the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, were a nightmare to command and control and provide for logistically during the deployment in Kuwait in 2003. Though significant during the initial, mostly static defense of Kuwait, it was not a combat-ready offensive force, and the Gulf Cooperation Council elected not to commit the force or any part of it in Iraq, either before or after Baghdad fell to U.S. and coalition forces. Now, it should be noted that the United Arab Emirates gave considerable thought to committing its very capable brigade to secure the Ramallah oil field in southern Iraq after Baghdad was taken by U.S. and coalition forces, but eventually thought better of it and redeployed the brigade in May of 2003. This decision had a significant impact on my future, for rather than serving as the senior advisor to the UAE brigade in Iraq, I was assigned to staff and develop the new Iraqi army. The new Iraqi army would prove to be a small, poorly armed and equipped, and ultimately inadequate force, considering both the internal and external challenges that confronted Iraq, certainly in 2003-2004. Now, the slide depicts the vision that served as a start point for a new army in May-June of 2003, following the Coalition Provisional Authority's decision to disband the standing Iraqi army. The army was not envisioned to be a particularly strong force, and it would have to be ultimately significantly funded and resourced to achieve a true combat readiness capability late in 2004 and throughout the period leading to our withdrawal some 7 years later. Major General Paul Eaton, United States Army, commanded the Coalition Military Assistance Training Team in June of 2003. He was serving as the commandant of the infantry school at Fort Benning when he was called to this assignment. I was assigned to the new Iraqi Army project a month before he assumed command to lead the initial staff work, stand up the command, and plan and conduct reconnaissance efforts to identify training and recruiting sites throughout Iraq. I served as the Chief of Staff and the Deputy Chief of Staff for operations for the bulk of the period June through August 2003. Now, very interestingly, VMI Corporation provided the bulk of the trainers for the new Iraqi Army in 2003-2004. The VMI Corporation provided very, very professional, retired officers and non-commissioned officers, primarily from the United States Army, for that very, very demanding task that they had to train the new Iraqi Army. Now, the CMAT would expand significantly in June 2004 under General Petraeus, and be designated Multinational Security Transition Team Iraq, or MNSTICI, with the mission to develop military, police, and other security forces for Iraq. But during the critical first year, as the CMAT, it was grossly undermanned and poorly resourced. The manner in which the CMAT commander and his staff dealt with its mission requirements under such poor conditions is discussed at some length in the book. It will undoubtedly make you wonder how our Army could have possibly undertaken such a mission in such a poor and unrealistic manner. The Multinational Division Central South in 2003 was commanded by Polish Major General Andrzej Tiskiewicz. He was an excellent choice for the position, having commanded airborne and mechanized units, was fluent in Russian, and had learned to speak very good English at the age of 44 after the Warsaw Pact was dissolved. His assignments included serving as the Polish defense attaché in Ankara, Turkey, and as the Polish military representative at Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, from 1999 to 2002. The Multinational Division Central South would prove to be his biggest professional challenge. It was an unwieldy force with 23 national contingents, including United States units in direct support. The division was built around 3 infantry brigades, commanded by brigadier generals from Poland, Ukraine, and Spain. These brigades included most notably troops from Bulgaria, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and El Salvador, Honduras, and the Dominican Republic. Thailand, Mongolia, Slovakia, and Romania provided engineer units. Other contributing countries included Bosnia, Armenia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Now, General Tiskiewicz built his staff primarily around Polish officers whom he trusted. Now, this slide depicts its organization. It could not have been any other way, as the trials and challenges that confronted the division would very clearly demonstrate. It's important to note that these men were superb officers, but their staff work and decision-making was a bit behind the much faster-moving American and Western European-led staffs at the 2- and 3-star levels in Iraq. The situations and projects that my advisory team worked required very special handling, encouragement, and careful oversight of the staff with regard to its production of plans, orders, reports, correspondence, and the all-important briefings. This is Iraq. Some 169,000 plus square miles of desert and mountainous terrain. The Multinational Division Central South's area of responsibility varied between the desert and mountains to its east, urban terrain characterized by places like An-Najaf, Karbala, and Al-Qut, and the deserts to the south, approaching the border with Saudi Arabia. The division's headquarters was some 90 kilometers south of Baghdad at Camp Babylon near Al-Hilla, a town in which the Coalition Provisional Authority's representative had his headquarters. The division was responsible for most of Babil government, Wasit government to the east, to include a portion of the Iraq-Iran border, An-Najaf and Al-Qadisiyah governorates to its south, Karbala governorate to its southwest, and then south to the Saudi border.
Now, I'll take a minute here to orient you on this map instead of familiarizing with some of the areas that I spoke of. The red dot there points to Baghdad, and some 90 to 100 kilometers south was the Coalition Provisional Authority's headquarters in Al-Hilla, and just south of it was Camp Babylon, the headquarters of the Multinational Division Central South. The Multinational Division South had a pretty darn large area of operation. To its east, Wasit Governorate, or Wasit Province, including 142 kilometers of the Iran-Iraq border, which I will talk a bit more in just a minute. Babil Province, south of Baghdad and just north of Al-Hilla, and then Karbala in the southwest, down to the Saudi border, An-Najaf, and these two provinces included the key cities of An-Najaf and Karbala, the two holy cities. That were the objectives of all of the illegals and immigrants coming from Iran. Al-Qadisiyah province or governorate, and then again east to Wasit. Many of you know that between 1980 and 1988, Iraq and Iran fought a devastating war. In order to secure its border with Iran, Saddam Hussein brought in a Yugoslavian construction company that constructed in large numbers of border posts along the border, not only along the 142 kilometers that I became very familiar with and controlled by Ukraine, but actually wherever you see Iranian border, there were numerous forts. These forts were very interesting. The upfront posts could stand upwards to 100 feet. The nature of the posts were most interesting. Some of you might remember movies and the like about the French Foreign Legion fighting in North Africa, and the nature of those forts that were manned by the Foreign Legion. As a matter of fact, Gary Cooper made a movie called Jess, in which he serves along with his brothers in the Foreign Legion. These forts were the Long Legion posts, I can't help but think it was taken right out of the. A number of them had taken very devastating hits in the massive artillery duels that occurred during that war. Those were ultimately just taken down. The others were reconstructed in large measure. Others were actually constructed. And ultimately, the Iraqis had a force large enough, but certainly not in 2003, 2004, to actually man that border.
And perhaps close it off, certainly to a greater degree than they were able to, or that we were able to, in 2003, 2004. Now, overall, the multinational division, Central South, much like the other multinational divisions, most notably the multinational division Southeast under British command, did a credible job given the number of missions it was given, including humanitarian assistance, point and area security, border security, training Iraqi military, police, and border forces, and support to combat operations. The division deployed as a peacekeeping force and somewhat reluctantly came to grips with the reality of combat in its area of responsibility. Shown here are the challenges the coalition faced when evaluating and deploying the division. Clearly, the division was quite limited in a conventional combat role. In the United Nations and the multinational force and observers peacekeeping settings, the first two bullets of the slide are particularly relevant. But they were also an issue with the multinational division Central South in Iraq. Even in the face of adverse conditions, there was seemingly reluctance to take the necessary actions to restore control. The multinational division Central South lacked combat power and the logistics to support offensive combat operations, and particularly during periods of limited visibility. It goes without saying that providing command and control of a combat division with 23 different national rules of engagement is not an easy task. Now, I selected these lessons learned from a tactical perspective for your review. You know, what it really boils down to is a need on the part of officers at all levels of command and leadership to develop positive, trusting relationships with their multinational counterparts and/or seniors to facilitate the staff and decision-making process and influence decisive decision-making and action. Patience and selflessness are virtues any advisor must have to succeed. General Marshall's wisdom, as noted on the slide, is particularly valuable to remember in multinational situations. And the quote by an anonymous infantry colonel, I think, is also appropriate for military advisors. These points of interest are operational level considerations for our senior leaders to know and understand to better appreciate what they can expect in terms of any national unit's operational capability. Knowledge of these points, as well as many other considerations, will drive how units should be augmented and/or where they can be more effectively employed. I should note that the first 2 points are consistent with the British approach to insurgency. The Brits were often critical of the American kinetic approach and emphasized the need to create an environment via engagement and addressing economic concerns of the populace. In the late 1950s, in Malaysia, the British were successful in this manner, attacking the roots of internal unrest while simultaneously trimming the bushes, as only the British could articulate, as required. At the strategic level, as all of our senior officers know, it is vital that we have a clear vision for what we expect to achieve before committing our nation's military in combat operations. Understand the resources required in terms of manpower and materiel to achieve our goals, and thoroughly plan and execute an exit strategy to avoid mission creep and open-ended conflict. Now, reflecting on the long war in Iraq, a term, by the way, attributed to General John Abizaid, United States Army, who commanded United States Central Command as the successor to General Franks from 2003 to 2006. I think our senior leadership was naively optimistic about the chance for peace and stability in a country racked by poverty, unemployment, a broken economy, a defeated army, dominating and competing religious leaders, sectarian differences, tribalism, various entities vying for power following the fall of Baghdad, an aggressive Iran, and a huge void left by Saddam's removal from power. I think we failed to put Iran on notice after we occupied Iraq, paid little attention to our genuine need to install a functioning Iraqi government in Baghdad, and planned to execute an expeditious exit. We failed to place a decisive force on the ground after the fall of Baghdad to secure Iraq's population centers and borders, and failed to exercise the diplomatic strategic task to secure sufficient multinational forces to assist that effort. And finally, and sadly, I think we broke our Army. A superb fighting force in 2003, but one never intended to fight a protracted war. The all-volunteer Army's viability was and is today questionable at best. Our officer corps, to which the
Army is entrusted. I want to say that again. Our officer corps, to which the Army is entrusted, needs to speak honestly about the Army, its recruiting, training, standards, culture, and readiness to fight America's wars efficiently and competently, as well as the future of the force as it evaluates the threats our nation will likely confront in the years ahead. In closing, I would like to read to you a few short passages from In Strange Company that summarize my thoughts on my Middle East and Iraq War experience and provide you an azimuth for your future service as officers in our Army. And I quote, "Given its experience in Iraq, perhaps the next generation of senior officers will better serve the nation with realistic plans, objectives, and manageable goals, while simultaneously ensuring their civilian masters fully understand the risks, military necessities, and possible consequences of their actions. They must have the moral courage, upon recognizing failure in planning and later in execution, to strongly advance solutions. They must develop the stamina and the will to speak up, even under the threat of being marginalized or punished. Only then will they not fail their nation and their troops on the ground. This is not just their job, it is their duty." And finally, and I quote, "Reflecting on the challenge of the last 10 years of my military career, I am comfortable. I fought a long but good war that, as bad as it was at times, allowed me the opportunity to help a lot of good people and make a positive difference, however small, for my country and the multinational forces with which I served. I remain hopeful peace may yet come to the Middle East, and America's efforts in Iraq and those of our fallen will not have been in vain." Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention, and I welcome any questions or comments that you may have. Thank you very, very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, we've got about 10 minutes left. Please queue up to the mic here so we can capture your question and everyone can hear it. Thank you.
Alex. So like, look, that's all. I don't need.
Cadet Bladorn, Colonel Tiso, sir. I got a question about the coalition of Arab nations between Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, their military forces that they kept together in Saudi Arabia, and the standards of their leadership. Why did it seem that a lot of the Arab forces in the region were very ineffective and inept at dealing with insurgencies and even just wanting to deploy their troops or training their soldiers? It seems like a common theme I've heard from many Army officers who've been in the Middle East.
And are you referring specifically to the 2003 timeframe or in general?
In 2003 timeframe.
Okay, very good. Okay.
The Arabs, the Gulf Cooperation Council has a genuine concern for its defense in light of the Persian threat across the Gulf. Often referred to as the Persian Gulf, our Arab friends prefer to call it the Arabian Gulf. As a result, they came to the conclusion, given the mischief that the Iranians inevitably conduct within the GCC, that they needed to upgrade their forces, and they realized they could not do it individually. So they put together the Peninsula Shield Force, and it was decided that Saudi Arabia would lead it. Saudi Arabia being the largest of the countries in the GCC, and therefore the country that was capable of providing the largest ground forces. And again, they located and built their headquarters at the position that I showed, some 120 kilometers south of the Iraqi border in northeastern Saudi Arabia. Now, I've been around the Arabs for a good long time, and I can tell you that there's a significant difference in their military culture between ours, or the Western forces, and theirs. Ultimately, and I recognize that we're short on time, and I appreciate so many questions lining up here. Ultimately, that culture leads to a weakness in training. Not in every case. I will tell you that the battalion provided by the Omanis, trained by the British, okay, and there's still a considerable British presence in Oman, is extremely capable armored reconnaissance battalion. The Saudis appreciate the presence of American advisors in the country. But ultimately, we would find that within their officer corps, and I went to school with several, okay? I remember being in the advanced course with some of the captains from Saudi Arabia. We had a particular exercise where we had to dig in. Break out the tools, men, okay? Because we're going to defend against the force coming from that direction. Saudis wouldn't dig in me. I said, hey, here. So I did it. We don't do that in Oregon. Okay. All right.
Thank you very much, sir.
No. But just to let you know, I made reference earlier to the United Arab Emirates. Individually, they were capable, very, very capable. But they lack the logistics, don't have enough aviation. They have to be augmented. And their ability to conduct offensive operations, as a result of the inability, I think, to conduct the exercises that we routinely conduct within our national training centers and the like, significantly limit their capabilities. But I submit to you that it is the martial culture, more than anything else that I spoke, that best addresses your concern.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, thank you.
Sir, Cadet Cherry, thank you for coming to talk last night and tonight as well. It was an honor to hear your speech last night. My question for you is, the U.S. has fought the majority of its wars with coalition forces throughout history. Do you think, and you obviously brought up the lessons learned from your experience in these coalition forces, the unsuccessful nature of this war in the Middle East against terror organizations was a result of putting together 20 countries with different doctrines and cultures to fight as a coalition force, or was it the nature of the enemy in fighting terrorist organizations?
Well, as I mentioned, when you have those many nations and you can't have a single rule of engagement, you find yourself conducting operations with 23 different units. How do you coordinate that? Well, I can tell you how the Polish did it when they had to. They kept a ready reserve force of Polish, very strapped, commando-like troops at Camp Babylon, at the headquarters. And if one of the other contingents within that division could not or would not act in an aggressive manner, given the threat, then that force was available to deploy. Colonel Gray and I have a great deal of experience in the 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault. We normally, in that great division, form infantry task forces that include direct support aviation. One of the things that I suggested to the commanding general and ultimately to the Ukrainians, who needed it more than anyone else, given the fight they had along the Iranian border, was that they do exactly that with the contingent of Polish helicopters that operated from the air base at Al-Qud in their direct support. They did that. And along the way, they became a heck of a lot more effective in controlling the illegal immigration coming across the border. It just takes a great deal of imagination how to do this. Now, what do we take as a lesson learned, though, in how we put these forces together? The fact of the matter is I am of the opinion that we put these forces together in the manner that we did so that we could show the world was supporting our effort in Iraq. We didn't give a whole lot of thought to their tactical or operational ability. We were thinking more along the political vein, because I don't think we fully realized just how bad the situation in Iraq was. But by August of 2003, it became very, very evident that what we had done was put together in large measure forces that were inept by virtue of the rules of engagement under which they deployed and the lack of resources that they came with. Therefore, the lessons learned at the tactical and operational level that I cited in my presentation.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Right.
Good evening, sir. Cadet Davey, thank you so much for coming. You had mentioned earlier that there was a different pacing and manner in which the Polish had planned as opposed to Western European forces. Were there any other significant differences you noticed between, say, American and Western forces as opposed to forces that came from former Soviet bloc nations?
At the lowest levels of tactical leadership and command, I found that the Polish, particularly the Ukrainian paratroops and infantry, were absolutely superb. Pound for pound, I thought that the finest troops in Iraq were the Ukrainian infantry. That's a hell of a thing coming from an American officer who served in a number of elite units, by association, Ranger Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, other paratroop units. But they were magnificent fighters, and they knew how to live under very, very difficult and unresourced condition, and never a complaint. Never a complaint. I loved being with those guys. I took every opportunity I could to serve on the Iranian border because they were the guys who were delivering the goods. Planning and decisive leadership. Decisive leadership, once that plan was okayed, was the principal lack in the Warsaw Army units. And why is that? Well, we all know, I think most of you should know, but that in the Eastern Europe countries and in the Warsaw Pact, there was central planning and central execution. You don't make decisions at your level. You wait for those decisions to come down from central. That is a slow process. You, young officers of the future, need vertical. And in tactical situations, will make the decisions on the ground, as you state, in keeping with the intent of your commanding officer. They're only beginning to come to grips with commander's intent and execution in the manner that I just described. And that is their single biggest clock.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Last question, Blake.
Good evening, sir. Cadet Patterson. My question for you is, speaking more broadly, what do you think was the biggest lesson that you learned working with a command that has so many different nations within it?
I think the second most important thing that I already had a pretty good feel for before I went to Iraq, but became increasingly evident, was first to recognize that these soldiers, these officers, though trained, though lacking perhaps in the manner that I just discussed, were nonetheless superb men to the most part. And they had a lot to offer. And the main thing that I took from that experience was the need to be a good listener. And in being a good listener, to nonetheless wait, to be patient, and look for an opening where I could perhaps have some influence on the nature of their operations. I could tell you a number of stories, one of which stands out in my memoir, was the one where I made the suggestion, after listening to the operational concept for the conduct of operations in the Ukrainian area of operation, that we tie an aviation element to the immediate reaction force of the Ukrainian paratroops, so that they would be in strict coordination and communication with each other and could move and act very quickly. When I made that recommendation, after listening to their entire concept and complimenting that on the general concept for their operation, there was silence. Imagine these Ukrainians, stone-faced looks. And I thought to myself, you're done, Tiso. You trained to kill every one of these guys 20 years. And now you're standing here in front of them, you're going to kill you. Well, they did. Instead, they stood up and applauded. They actually agreed, as long as they knew that the rest of their plan was great. I had found the gap. And I speak about it, again, as I mentioned in the, you have to look to those opportunities. You have to be a good listener. When you see that up, then you have to understand that words are important. Then you have to understand that you cannot be ugly about it. But you have to be professional about it. Express why. That always important why this might be a good idea. We'll find that they're good listeners too, because I will finish on this note. All the problems we have in the American Army today, I would say, ladies and gentlemen, we have significant problems for liability faced on. Absolute foolishness. I'll let it show us that, or I can so. But I will tell you this. Our training, our schools are highly admired around the world. And what you bring to the table, regardless of the rank on your collar, be it at the tactical, operational, or strategic level, will carry great weight. An American officer opens his mouth and starts to speak. You'll find that until you say something stupid, he will be listened to and given a great deal of thought by brothers who are listening. We have a tremendous responsibility as an American combat officer, or combat support, or even combat service support officer. Your words are important, and they will carry. So as I ended my comments last night, understand that. Be ready. And God bless each and every